is. It's so wrong.
What?
Right? This. Okay, so we're reading in Genesis 30:14, and Rachel. So Reuben went out and found mandrakes in the field and brought them back to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband?" I'm like, small matter. Would you take away my son's mandrake also? I mean, this is sounding a little snarky. And then Rachel said, then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes. See, this is wrong.
It is.
I mean, it's like manipulation and using, I mean, I don't know, I'm just disturbed.
Well, you've got a reason to be disturbed. If we go back to where this starts, it's in the chapter before, right?
Where the whole deception happens and where
Jacob, why there's more than one wife.
Yeah, we have to go back to
chapter 28. Chapter 29 actually is really where you were talking earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at this subject, this this is just how we interact over things, and we've talked about doing this live, and it's just time that we should really start doing this. When we look at the whole idea of polygamy biblically, it may be allowed, but it never has good proof. There's not one biblical example where there's rest in the home, where there's equality in relationship, where there's equality in the relationship between the husband and more than one wife, equality with the children, favoritism, division, manipulation, divisiveness, always is inherent.
Or the concubines or the servants coming into play.
Yeah, and
that happens a lot in here too.
It does.
In Genesis.
It really does.
And other places.
We won't go to where the worst case of that is biblically right now. We'll just look at Jacob. We'll look at him. If you like the Hebrew pronunciation, it's Yaakov, and whichever one you choose to use, that's pretty much up to you. But if we look at the history, how did Jacob get these two wives?
Well, because he saw Rachel, and he wanted a wife. He went to look for a wife, and he finds Rachel, who is out with her father's sheep.
Well, if we back up a little bit before that, Jacob really means manipulative or divisive one. He's a supplanter, and he cheats his brother out of his birthright, cheats his brother out of his blessing. His brother isn't a good character, and the end doesn't justify the means, not biblically anyway. But the whole reason why Jacob flees to his mother's brother's house is because his brother wants to kill him.
Oh yeah,
for
that. Okay.
Why? Basically because of all the deception that Jacob's done, cheated him out of everything. So Rebecca talks to Isaac, Jacob's dad, gets his okay, and they send him off to her brother's house up in Mesopotamia, while Esau supposedly is going to calm down. And we realize that he never does. So that doesn't resolve that. But Jacob shows up there to Rebecca's brother Laban's house. Laban invites him in, takes up residence. Jacob starts working with him. Laban has how many daughters?
2. that are named here anyway. Two.
Right, two.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Rachel and Leah.
okay, and what do you know about Rachel? What do you know about Leah?
So it says, besides that Rachel was out with the sheep, that
Okay,
she's,
so Rachel's the one that Jacob met when he came into,
and she's beautiful in form and appearance. And it says Leah's eyes were weak.
well, what else does it say?
But Leah is the older of the two, and Rachel the younger of the two.
Okay.
And there is some tradition.
Right. But it says
But
on
was
the,
that tradition, like, would Jacob have known about that?
from a different place, and
Okay.
he doesn't know about this tradition. But when you look at the context, Leah's an attractive woman also. She's got a handsome form. She's a very attractive woman physically, just her eyes are weak. So Rachel is a little bit better looking because of her face and her eyes being better. But they're both very, very attractive women.
Mm-hmm.
So, not that,
But to give Jacob, he saw Rachel first.
right. And so, what, he stays with Laban for a while.
And he could have liked her because she was a shepherdess.
There can be a lot of reasons why he likes her.
We won't say that it was just because she was beautiful or anything. I
We
mean,
find later on that she's not honest,
yeah.
and she's not really pure. Looks can be quite deceiving. It's a lot better to make choices of maids on character.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
way,
usually.
way better thing to do. So after Jacob stays with Laban, he goes, well, you're working with me, and you're doing really good, and you're making me prosper a whole bunch. My flocks have never been so healthy and plentiful and fruitful in their life. So what can I give you for working for me? And what's Jacob do?
Well, Jacob says, give me a wife. And he would like Rachel.
Okay, and what's the deal he makes?
7 years he's going to work.
For Rachel to be his wife. So at the end of the 7 years, he says, okay, 7 years are up. Give me my wife. Laban has a wedding feast, invites a bunch of people over, does the typical thing with a wedding feast, slips his oldest daughter, Leah, into the marital chamber
And it's dark.
at
It's
night
very dark. It's not like our dark.
with no lights,
No lights.
no candles, no lamps, nothing.
And she could have had a veil, even. Maybe. Who knows?
Well, he goes in, he consummates his wedding. In the morning, he wakes up, and he's not with the one he'd worked 7 years for. He's with Leah, the older daughter. He's understandably quite upset.
But he did the same thing
Okay.
with deceiving his father, pretending that he was his brother Esau.
Which
he put
one?
on the fur, on the goat fur,
On his
on
hands and
his
his arm.
hands and his neck and his arms, so his dad feels that. And so he did the same thing,
Pretty much, which is
which
something,
gets him into this position.
which is a very interesting thing. Biblically, the Lord commonly will deliver us from our faults through the same mechanism in which we display them. So, He's using Jacob's own deceptive nature to free Jacob from deception in this case. We pretty much are going to suffer in the way that we make others suffer. We're pretty much going to die. We make other people die biblically. So this is how justice works out biblically, and it's, if you can get us outside of the anger of all the injustice, you realize how much poetic justice is in what Laban does with them. It's perfect for who Jacob is and how he's lived his life, to make him free of that. So what happens in the morning?
So Laban, Jacob confronts Laban, and Laban's like, well, hear me out, complete the week, which is the wedding week, and you can serve me another 7 years so that you can have Rachel to be your wife. And the servants as well. Gets a servant with that.
Well,
then
Jacob confronts him with being dishonest. And Laban says, hold on, wait a minute. This is the custom with our people. And if you look at some of the other parabiblical books, like Jubilees, really explains this situation here a whole bunch more, in that in Jubilees, Laban tells Jacob that it's an abomination before the Lord to marry the younger daughter before the elder. It's an abomination where he will judge a people very severely. So you need to teach all of your people this so that they will be blessed. So it doesn't tell us in Genesis, it tells us in a parabiblical book called Jubilees, which used to be in the canon of scripture that we have way back when Martin Luther was doing all his studies and all that. It's been taken out since his time and our time, and it doesn't make a lot of sense because they're quite biblically accurate. But it puts a little bit more into why Laban does this. He's just not honest with Jacob in all of that. So once he finishes the week out with Leah, Laban gives him Rachel to be his second wife. So now
he just has to do the 1 week.
He has to wait a week and give her the week of spending that week with Leah.
Oh, so that maybe she'll be pregnant in that week.
Well, it's an interesting thing.
Because then she has the firstborn.
When we look through the 5 books of Moses, it becomes really clear that if a man takes a new wife, even in a time of war, that when he takes a new wife, he's excused from any public service like war for a year, so he can learn to comfort his wife, and the two can knit hearts and learn how to work life out together. So Laban reduces down to a week. Spend a week with Leah. Learn who she is, learn how to interact, enjoy her for the week. And it's not until you're done with the week with her that I will give you her sister. So after the week's over, he finally gets Rachel, who he really wanted in the first place. What's the Lord show us about how Jacob interacts with the two?
Well, it says, so Jacob went in to Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And so we were discussing earlier about that word, hated.
Yeah.
And I'm reading out of the ESV. What does it say?
Okay, so Lisa's reading out of the ESV, and hated is a pretty strong word. And if you think about the context, he's sleeping with both of them. The Lord sees that his interaction is not equal, and so he opens Leah's womb and she gets pregnant. So hated seems to be hated is a really strong word, and it doesn't really fit the context that a man would hate his wife and still be sleeping with her and she gets pregnant. So it seems like that's too strong of a word. If we look at the NASB, it says unloved. And that word pretty much means whatever you would expect it to mean in the Hebrew. Unloved commonly is translated as hated, but if we look at Webster, or if we separate the word, when we something, we undo it. So he undoes his love for her. And it's like he gives a double portion of that to Rachel, and he takes that away from Leah. It's not like he absolutely, totally hates her, but he reduces the amount of love that he should have for his wife.
Yes, but look at the Spanish translation.
That's where we're going. So we're looking at which verse here?
31.
Okay, so 31. So I've been doing devotions in Spanish for years, and it really does something to your mind to have to slow down and get into a different language. So this says, vio el Señor, so the Lord saw que Leah era aborrecida. What that Leah was to be abhorred. Y le conocido hijos, pero Raquel era estéril. So,
but I just looked that up, the aborrecido, and it means bored, annoyed, upset, angry. So
it depends on who's translating that. Aborrecida is pretty much abhorred, which is another very strong word. So we'll get out a good Spanish English dictionary, and we'll see what that says. So, aborrecer is the verb, and it's to abhor, to detest, to hate. Once again,
that's pretty strong.
It's extremely strong, and when we look at it, it's very, very difficult to translate directly one language to another. You can typically get close. He couldn't totally abhor her and continue to sleep with her.
Well, he could have if he was a narcissist or something like that.
Okay, you have a point. When you look at the rest of Jacob's life, how it plays out, it doesn't appear that he would really be a narcissist. He becomes very self-sacrificial. Narcissists cannot be self-sacrificial.
Yeah.
So that alone takes that one away. He is in the process of being broken from his own offensive double standard of living to a more biblical one. And his multiple wives are part of what helps bring him there. The interesting thing when we look forward from this passage that puts a little more light on this, Rachel ends up dying before Leah does. It's not till after Rachel dies that Jacob can really see who she is. And in Jacob's view, she's a perfect wife. When he gets older and he understands. And he was, what? He was 85 when he married him?
Something like that.
Somewhere in that
Pretty
neighborhood.
old.
So a lot older than we typically are now. And at 85, you would think you'd have wisdom, but you can also be really set in your ways living alone for 85 years. And it's in living with others that we learn how to bend and meet in the middle in compromise and self-sacrifice.
Well, and if I can interject, there could be some familial spirits that came along with him. He had just left a situation where there was deception in his household growing up.
Yeah, there's a lot of division. His mother actually loves the son who the Lord loves the most. The father loves the oldest, but the Lord detests the oldest because he's just got an evil heart. And that plays out in the end. So it becomes a lot more obvious, although in Jubilees it clarifies at the end of their days, Esau comes with his sons and 4,000 men to wipe Jacob and his children off the face of the earth. And Jacob pulls out, actually Jacob's son Judah hands Jacob a bow and says, "You need to kill him. We will not kill him. He is too much like you." So Jacob pulls back his bow and he ends up killing his brother. And then the king that's next to him and his sons in companies of 50 go and destroy companies of 1,000 men that came against him. But he took out the two leaders first. So that division never goes away. It really doesn't, and there's a whole bunch more in it. But the thing that's really interesting when we look at all this is the thing that gets Lisa so upset. And I agree with her wholeheartedly in that there's people that talk about this thing of polygamy and how wonderful it would be. There's never a good example of it. It always brings this kind of contentiousness. Doesn't matter how great the person was. It's polygamy and the division with polygamy and the justification of polygamy that divides David's house in the end. It actually justifies murder, adultery, murder, and the destruction of his own household just with this whole issue of not having a monogamous relationship. When you look at it, we've got a really good friend who went through a really terrible marriage. She got divorced after 25 years, and she's been with a great guy. But she makes this statement. The guy lives a long ways away and says, we don't have to work our stuff out every day. It seems like a great relationship because they go their way, I go my way, and we can let everything cool before we come back and have to work everything out. That is one of the biggest issues of working things out within a relationship. That's how the Lord allows us to be broken of our selfishness, to meet people in the middle, to make concession. And that's not to give up things that are right and just. It's to choose to not be selfish and always satisfy self. It's to figure out what makes whole households have harmony and rest and peace. So,
Well, and I don't know if I can explain it, what I'm thinking, but if you are divided between two lives, then you don't have your full commitment towards one, and that can be reflective of your relationship with Christ, with God. Because if you have two loves, well, or two relationships that you're going back and forth in between, I don't know how to explain that, but it's coming in my head right now that
if we think of self-worth, there's so many self-help books as far as marital interactions go, and some of them have some value, some of them don't. None of them have value if we use it as something to put in somebody's face and say, see what you don't do. That's not the way you apply biblical truth. The way we apply biblical truth is we look at the mirror of our own interaction at our own selves. And when we cloud that interaction relationally by bringing another one in, it allows us to not have to deal with our own misgivings, our own failings, our own weaknesses, our own failures. It just allows us to sidestep all of that because there's not an accountability. We can just step to the other relationship and makes it a whole bunch easier without really addressing the issue. But if we look how we're made, man was given a job because he is completed and he finds his worth in accomplishing things. A woman was given to man as his meat. And essentially she's made very much like the Lord. The Lord says, I am, and he leaves that open because he has whatever we need. A woman is given to man to meet him in whatever he needs. She gets her self-worth out of relationship. So if a man's got that split, her self-worth is beat down. And with it beat down, she can't commit fully, wholeheartedly in a relationship, because her value is not elevated to the point of being a joint heir. It's more of a servant, something lower, lesser. And that doesn't work. It doesn't work. Until we can come to a point of relating as a joint heir, where you choose to interact and live your life out as together fulfilling the call of walking with Christ, we can think we're doing fine if we're single. There's a lot more that comes to bear when you choose to share your life with somebody else and commit and not allow the sun to go down on your anger, but deal with issues so the enemy can't have a license to destroy them. And this is one of the simplest ways to do that. This issue of a divided heart, one or the other. There's a lot of ways to divide the heart. Mm-hmm. I mean, women's pornography is romance novels. And anybody that knows anything about that, it's huge. When you start looking at the issues of rape, the amount of that happens from a woman being the perpetrator is huge, but she's only caught about 5% of the time. I ran into some studies on that. So
and we know of an instance where someone was caught, somebody who grew up in the church and everything and was working in a prison, and she actually raped one of the inmates and got caught. So it's not something that's, oh, that doesn't happen. That was...
Right. And there's all kinds of incidences. So pornography is an issue on both sides. It's just, since romance novels and that type of thing are are quieter, they're more socially acceptable, but it's just as evil as what men do. Anytime either one is looking for any kind of fulfillment in someone else's divided heart.
And a divided heart doesn't necessarily need be someone else either. It could be work.
It can be.
Or it could be, even though it's someone else, it could be your children. And, I mean, there's a lot of things. Even your hobbies, like spending all your time hunting. Hunting is your first love. I don't know if this is getting off of the subject.
No, actually it's not, because anything that we have in our heart more than we have the Lord is an idol, and it needs to be dealt with. When you look at spousal interactions like this, anything that is allowed to rise up to have a greater importance than the interaction with the spouse.
Besides Christ.
Right.
Besides your relationship.
Anything is creating a division that is going to destroy the relationship. And those are things that we really need to be aware of. It's the little things that we justify. It's the little things we sweep under the rug so we don't have to really look at those. And Solomon puts it in this way: it's the little foxes that ruin the vines. And if you know anything about the grapevines, there's no reason for fox to be in there. And that's the same thing with other things in our life. It's the things we allow to come into our life where you don't honor each other, you don't cherish each other, you don't live a life to try and fulfill the other, to try and draw the other one into the fullness that the Lord made them to be. Anything.
You have really dirty pants on. I'm just noticing on the screen. So we have to pardon the dirty pants because
I was working
you're
outside, and that's part of the working person's thing. But and it's funny. It's just one of those things about the way that we live. But I hope this helps some of you guys out. We've been talking about doing this, and this subject came up, and just figured, well, we've been talking about it too long. Let's just go ahead and do it.
The one thing I think that I have to try to look when I'm reading this, and I'm like, this is really disturbing, but to think about how, one thing I noticed is like all their sins, and even though God looks favorable on them, they're not perfect, and neither are we. We shouldn't just go, oh well, that's okay, we're not perfect. None of us is perfect, but to look at that, they're not infallible. I think that's one of the biggest things that I started noticing is even though they're walking with the Lord, they still have their things going on.
What you just said is really important when they're walking with the Lord. People have things about them that others may be able to see, and the Lord just realizes that's part of our nature, and He doesn't put this laser beam light on that with a heavy finger and say, deal with this right now, unless it's something that's really huge. He knows our weaknesses, and He allows an access for us to continue in fellowship. It's not that we justify sin. There's a big difference between sin and sin nature. That's for a different subject. But He makes way to continue the relationship. And that's the one thing about committing and living with someone as a joint heir is you are always dealing with issues so you can continue the relationship. And the whole issue of polygamy bypasses that. The whole issue of divided heart bypasses all of that. And it's not healthy.
So work on your heart.
And so we'll be back with more of these. If you like this, hit the like button.